6:30. At the foundation, we have a rule that when we say something starts at a certain time, we start on time. So thank you for coming. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the El Dorado Community Foundation and the South Lake Tahoe Endowment, I'd like to thank you for attending One Degree of Change. And this is a creation that came to be because of conversations that we were having here in South Lake Tahoe. I was supposed to be here in February and was really looking forward to it. And unfortunately, change occurred in my personal life. And that change looked like this. So this is Carl. He's a paint horse. And on that particular Sunday, I stayed home at the ranch and worked. And Jim went to ride his horse, Carl. And Carl is one of those wonderful horses that is always very, very calm. He has a great temperament, and it's the ideal horse that everybody would love to own. Well, on this day, Carl did something a little unexpected. So at 4:30, the phone rang, and I picked it up. Jim's on the other end. He said, "I'm almost home. I'm hurt." And I said, "What do you mean you're hurt?" And then he told me the story of what occurred. So Jim was riding Carl. Carl spooked and reared up and flipped. And what that means is that he actually, his center of gravity flipped over. Jim came off, landed on the ground, and Carl landed on Jim. And you have a horse that's this big, 1,600 pounds, land on you, you feel it. So Jim got up, took the saddle off, put Carl in his stall, started heading home, stopped at the liquor store, he's Irish, got his beer, and came in. And his foot was already starting to swell. And so in the next couple of days, we were at Marshall Medical. We live on the west slope, and 3 broken bones in his left leg. So change can come about in unexpected ways at unexpected times. And so we have to be ready for that change. And having a conversation about change is really what we wanted to do in this community, because a lot of things are occurring here right now. And change is not necessarily a bad thing. And I found this quote, which I really love. If you do not create change, change will create you. And this is very, very true. And so many of our communities are finding that out right now throughout the state of California. One of the big crises that we have right now is, you can term it a lot of different ways. We have a housing crisis. We're becoming gentrified as a state. But housing and affordable housing is a problem. And communities really haven't come to terms with it. We have a need in this state for a lot of dwellings to be built to house the people that are here. And if we don't do it, people find their own solutions. And those solutions look like this. And this is a picture from Mountain View. And so every street in that community now is lined with campers. And so people are finding their housing. And so this is what happens when we don't create change. Change creates us. This is a residential street. And I went down to the community foundation in that area, and you wait until school gets out. Kids are coming out of the school bus and walking into a camper, and that is their home. And they've done some statistical research, and about 4 years ago, people under the age of 40, 2-3% were buying mobile homes, these kind of RV homes. That has increased to last year, it's 30% of all RV sales in the state of California are going to people under the age of 40. So they're creating their own home. And now we're going to start having communities come to terms with this. This is a large street, and look at the amount of homes that are lined there. And that becomes a problem in itself. So you have a 72-hour rule in that community where after 72 hours you have to move. But all you're doing is moving to a different street. So it's people just shuffling around. So we have to get ahead of the change, because change is constant. So this is a quote I ran across, and I really liked it. It's a little quirky, but it talks about change and how change can occur and what happens through just natural, organic change. There was a change that happened in my neighborhood that it was in January. Across the road from me are 89 acres. Now, all the people that live around the property know that that property is toxic. I live in an area where where there were stamp mills, so there were quartz deposits. So there's zinc, mercury, arsenic that is on that property. There was a mine. And we know that about 20 years ago, they took those big cans of toxics and they dumped them down the mine and then sealed it. So we know it's leached back out into not only the groundwater that surrounds that property, but into the soil itself. So the land goes up for sale. The woman that owned it passed away, gave it to her heirs. They put it up for sale. None of us would buy it because we knew what was on it. And it was relatively inexpensive. It was $450,000 for 89 acres. A young man from San Bruno bought the acreage and came up with his buddies on his motocross. And he wanted to turn it into a motocross compound. So that first weekend, we had 12 guys on motocross bikes and their shotguns and other guns. And they shot for 3 or 4 hours, almost nonstop. You can imagine what was happening with my neighbors. They were very, very concerned. So the emails start to fly, the social media kicks up, and it's all these really good people that I know saying really, really bad things and being really, really bad people. And I didn't chime into that conversation because I knew a couple of things. One is San Bruno and Shingle Springs are a long way from each other. And that 80 is not a highway you want to be driving all the time. It's just not fun. And that eventually he might get tired of the commute trying to come back up to the foothills. But something else occurred. So he came every weekend, he had a trailer, but the frequency became less and less. And I thought, well, it might be the length of time it takes him to get here. But what turned out to be is he is suffering now from a respiratory disease that's caused by the toxicity of the land that he bought. And they told him that riding the dirt bikes was stirring it all up, and then they're breathing it in. And so now he's not there. He owns the property, and I feel for him. But one of the conversations he never entered into was, what is in this land that I'm buying? And there wasn't that disclosure. So I'm sure there's going to be a conversation between attorneys. So a long, long time ago, when the earth was first created, change occurred. And before any of us were here, before there were oceans, and there was an incident where the earth was hit by a very large object. And this object collided with such force that it ended up tilting the axis of the earth and exploding debris out into space. That debris became our moon and is responsible for our tides. So out of that cataclysmic event, we have tides that drive and move our oceans, but also we have seasons. So without this tilt, we wouldn't have seasons. And all 325 million of us living in the United States would be living in Florida because everything else would be covered in ice. So the entire population of the world would be centered around the equator, and everything else would be frozen. But because of that enormous impact, we have a 23-degree tilt. So community change is focusing on programmatic interventions that directly impact categories. And as a foundation, I should have introduced myself, I just realized I didn't. My name is Bill Roby, and I'm the director of I know who I am. I'm the director of the El Dorado Community Foundation. And when we look at these categories, these are the ones that we are focusing on as a foundation: housing, human services, economic opportunity, and the environment. These are very important to us, and change is very important to us. We're working on human services change. We have a county that has a lot of services in it, but they're not always integrated. And there's not the intersections that maybe there should be. We're also a paper-based nonprofit community, which makes it very, very difficult to provide services. So as a foundation, we're looking, how can we move in and help the nonprofit sector to become much more efficient when they're looking and graphing and coming up with the treatment plans for the different client services that they're providing. And then how do you integrate that service so that when a person leaves program A and enters program B and C, that all those programs are talking to each other. So there's a coordination of how we treat people. And that's a change we would like to bring about. And it's wrapping the services around people, but also delivering a much more effective and efficient service. If we have an individual in this county right now that goes in for AOD services, they're going to have an intake. They're going to probably be assessed according to the DSM-5 and given a treatment plan. And they're going to follow that treatment plan and go through a 12-week course. And they'll graduate from the course. Well, statistics show us that about 56% of them will return at some point in the next 2 years. And what happens is they walk in the door, they go through the same intake process, they're probably given the same treatment plan because the record is a paper and it's in storage somewhere. So they're given the same treatment plan that failed them in the first place to do again. So we're setting them up to fail. And we also realize that community foundation, like this community, like every community in the state of California, is driven in service need by a small percentage of the population. So we have about 20 to 30% of the populace that is driving 100% of the need. And that goes for law enforcement as well. And it tends to be generational. So we have this revolving door that we need to change, and we need to address and get in front of. And we're having conversations about how we do that. Economic opportunity is we applied as a foundation for a grant from the USDA for $500,000 to start an incubator, a business incubator in our community that can create some more sustainable jobs, to create a place of home for people. Significant sustainable community can change only be brought about by developing the social fabric. The key there for me is the word sustainable. How do you create it sustainable is the most important. And that's done through engagement. And that's that emergent behavior. Follow where community is going. As a community foundation, we're very cognizant that there's two types of philanthropy. There's strategic and emergent. Strategic is where you have a foundation that says, for the next 5 years, we're going to focus on these three things. Maybe it's literacy, college education for first generation, and let's say puppies, because everybody loves puppies. And that foundation and all their donors target those categories and funnel all their funding to that. And they will move the baseline. So Stanford University has done a study on this. They will move the baseline up, and things get better for a while. The moment the foundation retreats from the funding, over a course of period of time, it starts to lower back to the baseline again. Emergent philanthropy is different because you're moving with community. So we watch where community is going, and then we move with them. We bring our funding in and our donors in, and we literally move with them. Because we know, and Stanford found this out, that when we move away, community doesn't. They stay and stay engaged and still move it forward. So the central tenet is tapping into the social life of the community and building community capacity. And what does that capacity look like? It is coming to the table. And for us as a foundation, it's being present. And it's not about us showing up and talking and leading. It's about us showing up and listening. Because we want to listen to where the community is, where the change is that they see, and then start to collaborate. What we do really well as a foundation is we're great knitters. And that's what we do every single day. We're sewing the fabric of community. And we do it with our grant making, and we do it with showing up. We do it by communicating back to our donor base. So one of the things that I thought about was, what was the common good? And I sat in my office earlier this week and made up this list. And how this list was generated by what's the least controversial things. What is the easiest that we can do that people would be in agreement with? So everybody loves education. I could put puppies up there. I forgot puppies. Education. We all believe in education. Being safe in our community. A working infrastructure. Clean air and water, and philanthropy. And there's a story about the philanthropy. On the West Slope, there is the El Dorado Taxpayers Association. And they're a pretty contentious group. And they meet and probably because they meet at 7:30 in the morning at a Denny's. And I went to one of their meetings and I was invited, and I'm presenting about philanthropy, and there was a lot of angst and anger, and I was like, I had no idea that philanthropy was such a problem in the community and caused so much angst with people. But I realized that it really wasn't about the philanthropy. It was just that they were just angry. And we seem to be in a culture right now in this country where we have people that feel that their angst is better than yours or greater than yours. And so there's all this anxiety, and it's feeding off of itself. And it's not healthy for us as a nation, and it's not healthy for us as communities. At the foundation, we strongly believe that there needs to be an entity in every community that's neutral. And that's the position we try to play, is that neutrality. I had somebody, one of the supervisors, they're looking for somebody in Supervisor District 2, which I live in. And they asked me if I would be interested in running, and I said, absolutely not. I am not doing the Hunger Games. I can't imagine being a politician. Not today. I love this quote. Isn't that great? I mean, you don't even have to say anything else. So we have a motto in this country, and it was first proposed by the Continental Congress in 1782. And as a hint, it's on our money. Can anybody guess what it is? E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. And when we come together as a community for a cause or a purpose, we can accomplish anything. I've seen it happen. It's starting to happen right here in South Lake Tahoe. A renaissance is happening here, and good is happening here. About 7 years ago, I was at an event in El Dorado Hills where an older gentleman was sitting in the audience. And at the end, he asked me to come over and talk to him. And his name was Steve Myers. And Mr. Myers passed away about, I think it was almost 3 years ago now. And him and his wife left $3.5 million to this community, specifically for the South Lake Tahoe Library. We just cut a check to the library for $157,000. We will be cutting that check to that library every year in perpetuity. The things that they will be able to do with those funds: a makerspace, a new children's section, expansion, changing the landscape so it doesn't look like a bomb shelter. The possibilities are endless, but it all starts in one place, and it's all about change. So it's embracing the change for the good that it brings. So this is the purpose around this conversation of 1 degree of change. For us, we have met these incredible people that have given and want to give back to the community of South Lake Tahoe. And we've heard these concepts and ideas, and we thought, can we weave this? Can we sew these concepts into an overarching sort of just theme? And then put it out to the community and see if it takes hold. And then if it does, then we start moving forward with the funding and see what we can do. We've seen other communities do this. It is possible. There's no obstacle we cannot overcome. So on behalf of the Foundation, the South Lake Tahoe Endowment, thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker. I've seemed like I've worked with her for years and years, and it's probably been about 8. No, it's actually been 10. And that experience started in working with a collaborative group of individuals that were making and responsible for grant making back into the community. And then I sat back and watched as she decided to go out onto the ledge and try to do more. And to this day, she's still doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, Wendy David.
And how about a hand for Bill? I'm old school, so paper, microphone, and no PowerPoint. Life happens when you're making other plans, a saying that many of you have heard, I am sure. A great deal of my life has happened right here in South Lake Tahoe. As I turn the corner to almost beginning another decade of my life, I'm reflective on that life, a life that has happened here in Tahoe, and the path that I have taken. A bit of that path intended, much of that path unintended, some wise choices, but primarily choices that I've never realized would turn me into the woman that I am today. All of them have changed my life. Many of them have changed our community, and many of them have changed the life of someone else to 1 degree or more. I want to share with you tonight my thoughts on that is only through conversation, continuously listening to each other, and saying yes more often than we say no, that we can make a change. Saying yes has made all the difference in my life. When Bill Roby and I were talking, I think it was probably about 8 months ago, about the 1 degree of change and what that meant to a community, we talked about how do you create that 1 degree of change in your community? How do you have those opportunities and seize those opportunities to be a catalyst for the 1 degree of change? And what does it mean to a community that can take on that attitude of we want to have that 1 degree of change? How can we create it? For me, the 1 degree of change always starts with 2 or more people making a connection. My connection with Tahoe began in 1973 as our young family arrived here in a big old U-Haul truck with all our possessions, 2 sons, a 3rd on the way, and no jobs. We had, Carrie and I, my husband had gotten married when we were 18. He had gotten his bachelor's degree. We had worked really hard. He'd gotten the job he thought he wanted in a big accounting firm, and that wasn't the right one. We'd moved down to the Central Valley and he'd taken a job in private accounting. 6 months later, we're like, oh, this isn't the right thing for our family either, so we decided we were going to take a break and come up to Tahoe and spend some time deciding what we were going to do with our lives. Our parents were thrilled with that idea. But we came, and we spent the month of July going to the beach, the two little boys, watching the sunsets, having the greatest time. And at the end of that July, and we all know how perfect most Julys are, we decided that we were going to stay. And so we took Boulder, Colorado off our list, which is where we thought we were going to go. We took Kerry, being a professional gambler, off the list. He tried that for a few weeks. And we stayed. And that's when our 1 degree of change first started for our family. We had a first grader and a preschooler, and my preschooler needed to go to or I wanted him to go to a preschool, and we learned about Tahoe Parents Nursery School. And Tahoe Parents Nursery School is a cooperative preschool. And we had no idea what a cooperative preschool was, but the foundation of a cooperative preschool is and always has been that it is a cooperative run by the parents, operated with significant parent participation. We became cooperative parents, partners in our children's education experience, working partners with other parents as we carpooled our children to school, worked at the school 1 day a week, attended night classes, served on the board of directors, and made the very best friends of our lives with like-minded parents who also had young children. Those parent, family, and child interactions have still influence our lives today. We did not realize it at the time, but we were connecting for the future of our community. Am I changing this? Oh, good. We felt almost immediately embedded in the life of South Lake Tahoe. Kerry ran for the Lake Tahoe School District Board of Education, which he had this great group of mamas, we called them the Mamas Mafia, that were his campaign. And he did get elected, although they were quite shocked when halfway through the campaign they found out that they were promoting a man that was only 27 years old. So he did that. We both got jobs, and we began to live here. We learned very early that we had to be decision makers for our community, that we had to be influencers for public education, that we had to do the very best we could for our community because we were doing this for the future of our children. We were doing it for the future of ourselves and for our friends and for our neighbors. And so it was one of the greatest lessons we had very early in our life, that if you wanted to be in a community that would be good for your family, you needed to be a part of that community. We soon were doing a lot of other things, like I was the president of Little League, which was even harder in some respects than being on the city council. So a woman president of Little League, that was not a great combination. We brought AYSO here. There was no soccer, so a group of parents brought the soccer league here, and then the high school wanted soccer. So the high school brought soccer, and parents, you know, it parent-led and parent-led, 1 degree of change at a time. Later, after having my kids go through Tahoe Parents Nursery School, I became the director at that school and served there for about 15 years. And while I served as the director at Tahoe Parents Nursery School, I had many, many more lessons, and most of them came through parents. One of the things at the school, we saved 3 special education spots each year. And this was a school that had 42 families in it, so it was a pretty big school. And one year, we accepted a family, Gina and Paul. Gina and Paul had 3 children. They were 4, 3, and 1. Gina and Paul had had very limited education. They had no social skills. They had no family support. And they had been referred to the school district, I think through the pediatrician. Their children were developmentally delayed, mostly because they had lived in isolation and hadn't had any socialization. So this is a co-op school, and everyone is welcome, and of course they were welcome. And they came in and had a hard time fitting in. Paul couldn't read, and so he couldn't read his job card for the day he was working. Gina was a little brash, and so had a hard time relating to some of the other moms. But they learned and started coming every day, and we started building a family with Gina and Paul. And Paul discovered that even though he didn't like being inside, and he didn't particularly like working with the kids, that he was great. He was great at bringing the tricycles out and putting the tricycles away and cleaning out the shed and, pulling the kids in the wagons. So he soon started liking being there so much that he was coming every day. Now this family, their children had never been out of pajamas in their entire lives, so they started coming to school at the beginning in pajamas. They didn't have pajamas, but the TPNS family had pajamas, and so, had clothes. And so they would bring clothes, and pretty soon this family had clothes. What we learned through that, by the way, they stayed for 4 years. They built adult relationships. They both went on to have jobs in this community. Their children graduated from high school. 2 of them ended up going into the military. And whenever I saw them, the rest of the time that they were here, it was always with warmth, and it was with warmth with every family that they had worked with. What we learned from Gina and Paul was that every single person has a value. Their value might not be the value you think they're going to bring to a conversation. Their value might be completely different from what you're expecting, but every single person brings something to the conversation, to the task, and to what we're trying to accomplish. And for Gina and Paul, they made many degrees of difference for what we as parents learned, while we were making a great difference for them. People bring value when they're allowed and encouraged and respected for the value that they bring. Conversely, when a person lets others down by not bringing value, being negative and being demeaning, that also can create change as well. That 1 degree can go the other direction, and I think we have to be careful about that. That 1 degree is fluid and it's fragile. I had a lot of notable yes moments in my life so far where we've made change in this community, and they all began with a conversation. One of the big yes moments was working at Tahoe Parents Nursery School. It was housed at St. Teresa's Catholic Church. And each morning, Father Grace would come in, and we'd chit-chat before the day started, and we'd talk about the boiler that was always going out, and we'd talk about, other maintenance things. And one day we were chatting, and he said, I want to bring a program to serve food to the hungry. And it was 1989. We were in a significant recession here in Tahoe, and I expressed my feelings to him that I wanted to be a part of that. And on October 19th, out of a conversation, October 19th, 1989, Bread and Broth was started, and we served meals to about 25 people that very first day. And from the beginning, it was a partnership between St. Teresa's and the Lake Tahoe Presbyterian Church. I am so honored to say that Bread and Broth, of course, is still going strong 30 years later. Bread and Broth has never missed a week ever of not opening their doors and having a hot meal for those that need it. That changed, and to your point, Bill, it changed the fabric of our community when we reached out and made a commitment to doing that. And that came out of conversation and connectedness. Another notable yes moment for me was when CASA came to Tahoe. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. And that came from a conversation I had with Ken Ralston, who is a lawyer here in South Lake Tahoe, passed just a short while ago. And he'd been talking to a judge in Placerville, and they had brought CASA to Placerville. And the judge said to him, I think it'd be great to have CASA up in Tahoe. And so Ken Ralston came to me and he said, well, what do you think about this? I had just a few days before read a front page story in the newspaper about a child that had been put in foster care, had then been released back to their family. The family was a family that had abused this child. The child went back to the family, and within about 7 days, this child was abused to the point of death. And I was thinking, this should never, ever, ever happen. Every child should have a voice. And so myself and 20 other people started the first class of CASA up here, and that was in 1994. So, and CASA is still going strong in Tahoe, and we have probably served thousands of children just here with having a voice. And that came out of people saying yes. And, as we sit in the Duke Theater tonight, one of those people that said yes that night, or said yes to that very first class, was Dr. James Duke, who this theater is named after. And he himself was also a CASA for decades. So it was the community saying yes to the 1 degree. Tahoe Magic is another yes moment for me, and that is a nonprofit that is here in town, and we serve families that are in crisis. That also came from a conversation. There was a philanthropist in town, and he, decades ago, was doing a party. He'd do it out at Valhalla at Christmas, and he did it for children, needy children, and he would give them Christmas presents. Well, he ran out of his philanthropic funds and said he wasn't going to be doing that anymore. And it was at a time when some girlfriends and I were talking about that and knew that this was important to some of the children in our community. And so we said, well, we could do this. And we took that on, and out of that came Tahoe Magic. And we threw a big cocktail party. We invited families to come. We said, you need to sponsor a family and get them Christmas presents. And for 16 years, we served about 600 children a year. We actually wrapped the presents in this room, 100 to 200 people coming together, wrapping those presents, getting them out to children that had been identified with the schools. And 16 years later, we were really confronted with the fact that our community had changed. Our population had changed. Many of our families had moved out. Many other families had moved in. We had families that, while it was lovely to give them Christmas presents, these were families that had perhaps weren't able to pay their rent, weren't able to pay their utilities, had a toothache, didn't have electricity, children that weren't going to school, children that couldn't finish their homework. And so Tahoe Magic had conversations in this community about maybe we should change our focus. And at that time, which has been about 12 years, we decided that we were going to go to doing crisis care for families. And just today I had 2 phone calls for crisis care. And so we provide one-time care to families that bridges them, hopefully, and most of the time it does, it bridges them from being homeless. It bridges that student from not having electricity. It bridges that family from not being on the street, and it helps Tahoe to take care of each other. So all of these organizations, they all just started with people connecting to each other. And I just believe that each one of us can do this. The Eldorado Community Foundation is another example, just a conversation of someone saying, oh, Wendy, I think you need to come to this. And many, many decades, not a couple decades later, but many years later, South Lake Tahoe is proud to have a very robust South Lake Tahoe cabinet. We have a Tahoe Women's Community Fund that just last night gave out $68,000 in grants to our community. So I believe that when we work together, we can create great change. I'm now a council member, as most of you know, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is that we've had change in other ways also, and we've had change in the way we interact with each other. And I have had some frustrations with the way people are interacting with each other, and one of the things that I wanted to do was create conversation around that. So about 5 months ago, when I began my term of mayor, I decided to do some coffee and conversations, and I know there's a few people here tonight that have joined me at those, so I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are later. Inviting people to come and just talk to each other face to face. In social media, it's very easy to have that false bravado of just throwing out whatever you want to say because no one's going to be responding to you, and you're not looking at the other person or the person you're intending your comments to. You don't see them, you don't see their response. So the first one I did, I was a little nervous about, and the police chief even came, and I discovered, much to my delight, that when people are in the same room with each other, they remember everything that their parents taught them. They remember that when someone else is speaking, that you listen. They remember that we don't say bad words to each other. They remember the respect of someone else's point of view, even if it's different from yours. They even remember to say please and thank you, which was another thing our parents taught us. So it's turned into being one of my favorite times of the month, is just sitting with neighbors, with constituents, with people that want to sit and talk about things that they care about the city. So that's been great. I feel connected. It feels very connected when we do that as well. I wanted to just give a little credit to Ben Damon, who's, I don't know if he's here tonight, but he is, oh, hi, Ben. So he's a great guy. I don't know him all that well, but he and I were at the Tahoe Mountain Lab one day, and we both were, got to find his paper, we both were listening to, I was involved in a little retreat, and he had popped in and was listening, and he made some comment like, well, you know, this isn't the most effective way of communicating. And he said, do you mind if I show you how I think, you know, communities can connect and be cohesive? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to hear it. And this has been about 2 years ago. And he wrote, on this scratch paper, he wrote what I have kept for 2 years, and when I really need to remind myself on how I can make a difference, how we can make a difference as a community, I pull this out. So this is a bit small. I'm going to get it up a little bit bigger because I just want to share it with you. Thanks for being here, Ben. I ought to have him talk about this. So Ben told me, he said, I should do the microphone. So Ben said that it starts with interactions, and your interactions result in connectedness and cohesion. But key to this is the number of interactions you have, the frequency, the quality, and amongst whom, and about what. So the connectedness that we get, which comes from the interactions, results in also the greater social capital, which is what we all want. He also said, which I love, is the how is more important than the what. So the how is really about how we get to the 1 degree of change. The how we interact with each other, how we respect each other, how we value each other for what we bring. I use this diagram, and I know that he is exactly right. If we are to move forward, it is through conversation, our interactions that have quality, and that quality of listening, asking questions, answering questions, and then moving forward towards a more connected community. From TPNS to CASA, to the school board, to the city council, with many, many years of experience and leadership, there are a few things, just a few things, that I know for sure. Saying yes to opportunities to elevate our community will result in that happening. I know that. Taking the opportunity to be a catalyst for the future of Tahoe will create a better community. And conversation and interaction are the most powerful tools that we have to build our future together. I have a bit of a confession to make before I leave, and that is a couple weeks ago I called up Bill and I told him, I said, I don't think I can do this tonight. Or I can't do it on this night. Said I'm going through a difficult time. I feel really vulnerable. I don't know that I can get up and talk and have critical comments. And Bill was his usual wonderful, understanding self, and he just said, I understand, Wendy, if it's not the right thing for you to do right now. And I think that was on a Thursday or Friday. And then I thought about it over the weekend, and I realized that by saying no to this, I was giving away my power and my voice to the power and voice of negativity and to the power and voice of divisiveness, and realized that that is not something I wanted to do. I did not want to give that away. And so I just want to thank the audience, and I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to have that as a reminder that never, ever give away what you have to someone else. Keep it, build our community stronger, build it together, and we will continue to elevate our community. Thank you. Thank you.
I could use a little Tahoe magic this winter's doing. The next speaker, okay. The next speaker is somebody I did not meet immediately directly. I actually, I came to know him as Jamie Orr's husband. And it was really Jamie who I really connected with. On a visit here, we happened to have cocktails together at a restaurant on Lake Tahoe Boulevard. And Jamie and I were going back and forth. And then all of a sudden in that conversation, she started to explain to me emergent behavior. And all these light bulbs started going off for me. And I realized that was who we were as a foundation. I can't remember the first time I met David, but I do know. I can't. I know when I met Jamie, I'm sorry. But I do remember being up at Heavenly, and you've got a lot of people in the ski lift line, and people are having quiet conversations. And I hear this yell, "Bill Roby!" And I'm like, great, thank you, David, for letting everybody know I was there. Everybody's looking around going, who's this guy? But I really got to know him much better through the work of the Mountain Lab. It is an important, critical resource in the community, and he provides a lot of leadership and mentoring and also connecting. So there's many, many times when I've walked in that door and the first person I see is David Orr, and he says, do you have a couple of minutes? I have somebody I want you to talk to. Ladies and gentlemen, David Orr.
Okay, so now we're going to play a game. How do I find my presentation? Give me one moment.
I can do it.
No,
I'm a techie. There you are.
I've got it. I know how to use computers, I think. So I guess I don't necessarily need to introduce myself, but I'm David Orr. I'm one of the co-founders of Tahoe Mountain Lab, and I'm here today to talk to you all about mountain town economies. But I thought it was important actually to start somewhere else and tell you a little bit about myself. That's me, and what Bill didn't mention about that day is I was wearing a cape, and that cape says Grumpy Local. It's just a silly thing I do. Anyhow, you might not know this about me, but I was raised by a mother who was determined to be both a mother and a father to me. So unfortunately, she was a single parent. And actually, really unfortunately for me, this manifested itself into her forcing me into the outdoors way outside of my comfort zone. Skiing, hiking, doing things that I just normally wouldn't do. Well, she had this really crappy car, the Chevy Nova. It was a 1984, I believe. And if you didn't know this, Nova in Spanish means no go, which is kind of funny, but this was what got us to the Sierras. And this is what started my passion for Tahoe. One day, we were coming back from a day trip to Boreal. I was about 6 years old. And I should mention my mom was a type 1 diabetic. She had lost most of her vision. She was a cantankerous person, though, and I think she had memorized the vision test at the DMV. I'm not even kidding. This is how my mom was. And she passed the vision test and held on to her license and continued to drive us into the Sierras, however dangerous it was. We got stuck in a blizzard. I'm 6 years old. Fast-moving storm comes in. I'm sitting there, and my mom's saying, I can't see. You need to crawl into the front seat and tell me where to steer, where to brake. Anyhow, the point I'm illustrating is that my mom created a passion for the outdoors in me, and she instilled that. And it's part of the reason why, to this day, I'm here in Tahoe. But let's fast forward to my adult life. I wound up back where I grew up, Mountain View, you know, that place with all the trailers. And actually, when I moved away from Mountain View, I just wanted, this is anecdotal and not part of the presentation, but that was just starting out. Those trailers were just starting to show up in my neighborhood, and it was bizarre. I didn't know what to make or think of it. But I started working for a variety of tech companies, invested in a few tech companies. Most of them failed. Most of them aren't around today. One of them is on this sheet. But it wasn't all fun and games. I spent a lot of time in traffic. Annika, can you stand up right now? Annika came into the picture. And so instead of spending time with my daughter after work or before work, I was stuck in traffic. So when it came to community in Silicon Valley, I say, what community? I didn't have time to get out there and enjoy it with my family. The culture at work, the culture at these early stage startups, everyone wore themselves, killing themselves at work as a badge of honor. It's ridiculous. So the net result of spending almost a decade in Silicon Valley was that I was at the most fat I've ever been. And I don't, you laugh, but I don't take pride in this. I was 210 pounds, and I'm only 5'8". I'm not very tall. I was unhealthy. And Tahoe has been my place where I came to exercise, to unwind. And I found myself bending over to try to strap myself into my snowboard, and I couldn't do it without getting winded. I was terrified. So terrified. The next time we came up to Tahoe, my wife and I sat on the beach with Annika, reflecting. And we were looking through our phones and looking at all the happy pictures, and all our happy memories were in Tahoe. And we realized at that moment, we're not going back. Tahoe's just better. Period. We had no idea what we were going to do in Tahoe. But we came anyways. And so when we got here, we networked like hell. We asked people a lot of questions, and we read books. Well, I didn't read the books. Jamie read the books. But she distilled them to me. We also talked to experts, people at the chamber, economists, anybody we can get our hands on. And what we found out is that this community, more than anything else, wanted a business incubator as a business. And what that is just like what this picture, if you were to exchange every egg for a business, And the Chick is a, fledgling business. That's what an incubator does. It provides it with the resources to become an actual thing. We did a bunch of research. So when we found out that entrepreneur support organizations were definitely a trend. But an incubator was difficult. You had to raise funds. It seemed like a dream that was very, very distant. So we found our own 1 degree of change, which was Tahoe Mountain Lab. So this is Tahoe Mountain Lab 1.0. This was our minimum viable product. This was our, let's take a little amount of money and try to figure out if this business has legs. And within a few short months, we figured out that it had legs. And we were lucky enough to meet Bernard and Christy Cregan, our now partners of Tahoe Mountain Lab 2.0. And to this day, I'm very thankful that this community has believed in the business that we've created here. We also realized in running Tahoe Mountain Lab that our community was similar to that of other mountain towns in many ways. And while Mountain Lab's success is really great for the community, it's only one small piece of the economic puzzle. Enter the snowflake economy. I think we all know what this means. Tahoe is a tourism, lopsided economy. That means low-wage jobs. It means poverty, unfortunately, for many of our citizens. We are, in a sense, still an extraction-based economy of the olden days, where they used to log Tahoe, but we're extracting from tourists instead. So when we look at the economy over years, what we find are a bunch of peaks and valleys. Because as the economy goes up at the national level, you see tourism increase. And as it goes down, we find ourselves in the troughs. But not only does that happen, but it's compounded by global warming and other factors that are impacting the number of tourists that come here. It's not a good way to exist within a community. So in creating Tahoe Mountain Lab, we found an answer, or we at least believe we have an answer to how we can even out these troughs and kind of get rid of that sine curve economy that we've been experiencing. And that one answer is entrepreneurship. But our community, it's always important to SWAT your own community. And so we borrowed this from Techstars and Mark Nager. And Mark Nager is the executive director of the Telluride Venture Accelerator. And it's 5 key indicators: density, culture, capital, talent, and the regulatory environment. So we went through, along with Chris McNamara, who I believe is actually in the crowd now. I saw him come in. We went through and SWATted our community. Density. Surprisingly enough, we actually do have some density here in terms of entrepreneurship. There are a number of companies, even a few venture capitalists that exist. But not only that, the Tahoe Chamber itself does a lot to support entrepreneurship, and so does the Tahoe Regional Young Professionals Group. Culture. When we talk about culture as a metric in which we measure stuff, we ask ourselves questions like, is our community sort of a give first type community? Do we give people, or do we help people without the expectation of return? Do we have a cultural identity? Right now, we don't have an identity. Capital. Obviously, every business owner starts with an idea, and they need capital to turn these dreams into a reality. Do we have capital here? There's some. You can go to the Tahoe Fund if you're doing an environmental startup. If you're an early stage guy, you could try out the Sierra Angels, or if you happen to be in Nevada, you could enroll in the statewide incubator program, Startup Nevada. And last but not least, over in Truckee, there's the Trail Runner International, a group of venture capitalists who make investments globally. And then it comes to talent. Well, how do we rank talent? Well, it isn't just the people here and the skills that people have. It's also the organizations that help foster talent. So, Lake Tahoe Community College, the Tahoe Chamber, the Tahoe Prosperity Center and their workforce programs, Beer.js, small groups that get together to talk about technology, like Tahoe Silicon Mountain. And last but not least, the regulatory environment, which I personally don't necessarily have any hope for, unfortunately, because it looks something like this. We've got an amazing number of jurisdictions to deal with when trying to make something happen here in the Tahoe Basin. So how did South Lake Tahoe score? We scored a total of 9 points. Now, what do those 9 points mean? Well, we're going to explain that. So there are 7 stages of startup communities. The nascent, which just means we're getting started. Foundational, the building blocks are present. Accelerating, people are actually moving here. People are bringing their companies here. Companies are actually getting started. Established, things have been going on here for a while. We're not great, but we're not terrible either. High functioning, a leader in some sort of global market. Maybe we could be a global leader in outdoor gear. Progressive, they're pushing the boundaries and advancing the definition of what it means to be an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And truly aspirational, which almost no community, I think, has ever been awarded this, which is sort of imagining what is really possible in a truly global, ecosystem. So let me talk about our current goals. And this goes to the Mountain Lab and the other people that are involved in pushing these goals forward. Our goal is to increase South Lake Tahoe's foundational score of 9 to an accelerating score of between 10 and 15 by 2020. So you might ask, how the hell are we going to do that? Right? What's the blueprint for success? Well, you heard Bill Roby mention it. A business incubation program, I think, is paramount to increasing density here and bringing about entrepreneurial success. But it's not just that. If we want to really improve density, Dave, I'm looking at you, we need tech meetups. Lots and lots of tech meetups where people are sharing ideas and information about JavaScript and Elixir and lots of other programming languages that I have no idea about. In terms of identity, currently South Lake Tahoe doesn't have one. Are we casinos? Are we bachelor parties? Are we skiing? Are we the outdoors? Well, I think Chris McNamara put it pretty well. We're the outdoor capital of the world. That's it. Let's stop debating and move forward. The other thing we're going to do in terms of capital is organize an angel investment network. One loosely organized angel investment network doesn't exist here in South Lake Tahoe currently or on the South Shore. And last but not least, in regards to talent, we're going to continue to attract and retain top talent while leveraging the community college's internship and 4-year degree program and workforce grants. In regulatory, that's going to be somebody else's 1 degree of change talk. So my ask of you is, if you're interested in fostering the entrepreneurship community in this town, please get in touch with me and talk to me about how you can help us, because this is a daunting task to build something almost from nothing when I showed up in 2014, and we need all the help we can get. So thank you.
Thank you, David. When I first moved to El Dorado County 13 years ago, I moved from San Francisco to a very rural community. And I didn't know what to expect. And the horizon was bright and new, and the possibilities were endless. But it was going to involve some change. And we embraced that change. And 13 years later, we could never have envisioned where we would be now. But we also realized a really important lesson in that journey is that we see our friends from San Francisco and the Bay Area come up the hill. And we see them come up every weekend or during the week, and they come up to Tahoe, and they come for a purpose of relaxation or to enjoy the outdoors or sports, but they also come for something else. And it took me a while before I realized what that something else was. They come to breathe. In the environments that they're in, they're competing for everything, constantly competing for space. They do it on the freeway, they do it at work, they do it at the grocery store, and they even do it here. And I realized that one day when I was leaving Tahoe on a Sunday, mistakenly, at 10:30 in the morning. And everybody was on the road. And so these people are all looking at their clock going, well, we have to get back. And we got to compete. And so they never really relax. And so there's something in that. I don't know what it is. But there's something there that we can teach them about breathing and why they come here. So for me, the takeaway is create change or change creates you. And that's something for us to always be very cognizant about. So I'm going to open this up to some questions. If anybody has any. Otherwise, I'm going to drive home and sleep well tonight. So, any questions? God, you're like the board of directors of the foundation. Actually, you're not. They peppered me with questions today. Anything? I mean, come on, Ben, you got to have something. No? Go ahead.
So if we all create our one degree, how do you get those that are in the negative and the outside on board with you? And if there's, this divisiveness would be great to just unite everybody. Or you just do your change and hope everybody comes with you?
I think that's what happens with emerge. Yeah. So the question was, how do you get the negativity to follow the positive? And that's a really good question. And what I have found in the 10 years as being the director of the foundation is that you push forward with the positive, and eventually the mass becomes so great that it overrides the negative. And think about negative. Negative usually comes from fear. And so it's a reaction to something. And so by disproving that fear or listening to what that fear may be, we can help people to move forward. So it goes back to that listening again. It's like, what is it? What is it, the basis that you're afraid of? And to understand that. And some, it's just change in general. I want our community to be like this, always. Well, that's a great thought. But there's some things we can do, like with the library. They're going to be phenomenal. They're going to change that library. So why shouldn't we do that? So not all change is bad, and that's the conversation. And then when you also work on the successes. And that's really important as well. And that can bring along the disbelievers. And then there are times that you have to just walk away from the negative voice. Because it all lives in our head. We all have it. It all talks to us. And I realized a long time ago, all it does is lie. So I just don't even listen to it. It's like, if it tells me you can't do that, I'm like, oh, I know I can. Or at least I'm going to try. So it's moving beyond that negative voice in ourselves. Or helping somebody else move. Yeah. Go ahead.
This is a question for Ryan. Listening to you talk about the different organizations in town that we've been involved with, I'm thinking, they are all very sustainable. Like they're still all in operation. And as you talked about it, it sounded like you started a lot of them with sort of large groups. And I'm wondering, is that true, or is there something intentional that you guys started doing, or that you learned that ended up making those sustainable? Because I feel like sometimes
Is it purple? Yeah.
I don't know if it comes.
Yeah. So I'm not
afraid I'm
mic'd.
gonna
I'm not
break it.
mic'd like they are.
Go ahead.
So I think your question is, did we intentionally start with large groups, or did they start with small groups?
Or did you find that there was some magic element that helped those organizations be successful?
I do. So I do think that the magical, the part that did sustain them was bringing in the community. And so for Tahoe Magic, for example, at the very beginning, we brought in our entire community for this, and you'd have 200 people coming to wrap presents at Christmas time, and you'd have 11 Santas that were taking them out to the homes. And so it became part of community tradition. Bread and Broth takes a lot of volunteers, And so constantly going out to the community, even to today, and continue to ask more people to come in and join in what is a community organization. So even though they started small, now that you asked that question, I think we intentionally grew them as quickly as possible. Yeah. I wanted to say one thing to the positive, overcoming the negative and continuing to go with the positive. When I was on the school board, we had a real need to rebuild and expand our facilities. Our facilities were very aged. We had to go out 3 times to have that happen. The first time we went for a parcel tax. The Jarvis Gann people came in. It was a very contentious ballot measure. It failed. We went back out with a bond. The community thought we were asking too much for the bond. It failed. We went right back out with listening to our community and taking what we were asking down by about $25 million and saying, okay, we're just going to ask for what we really need. Our community then supported it. So it's continuing to listen to your community. You kind of have to listen to that negative voice, but you have to stay in the positive and keep moving forward. And I think that's just one of those secrets, is really just stay on your track. But you have to acknowledge what your community is saying at the same time.
When the foundation, we looked at the National Chronicle of Philanthropy does a yearly survey of giving of all the United States. And it's done based on tax returns and some other data. And you can drill down to your community. So we looked at El Dorado County and where the giving trends were in our community, because it really goes to the heart of, does the community feel good about itself? Is it connecting with itself? So the place in El Dorado County that has the highest per capita giving is Camino. And when you think about it, it makes sense. These are families that have been there for generations. These are the Apple Hill families that do a lot of giving. A lot of the vineyards are in Apple Hill. And the second, South Lake Tahoe. Third, Placerville, Cameron Park. Fourth, El Dorado Hills. The highest per capita income in the county of over $80,000 has the lowest per capita in giving. Why? Because it's new. Because the people that live there have come from someplace else, and their giving trends go back to that original location. So we have to wait for that next generational turn before they start to connect with who they are and their community and start giving local. Mm-hmm. So was there another question?
I see a question up here.
So I love your whole coffee thing. How can we evolve that for more opportunities for conversations that don't take place over the internet?
I would love that. This was pretty
That was
simple.
a really nice way of saying
I think it's great to keep it as simple as this is. We put a little ad in the paper. We say our next coffee and conversation is here. We buy some Pete's coffee. Whoever comes. And the first couple times I did it, I didn't have a focus topic. And so what was happening is no matter what people wanted to talk about, what we talked about was people that were unhappy with VHRs. And so, which after a while is kind of the same stories in a different neighborhood. And so we started having it kind of topic-centered, which was great because it brings out different people. So I think it's great to have conversations and have some community topics and just gather around. You just need one person, just like tonight, to call on other people to talk and start the conversation. So it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. And I hope others have as well. Yeah.
Karen, Jude.
So all 3 of you have brought large sums of money in, and I imagine some of it's not always from here in Tahoe. Starting a non-for-profit, creating a foundation, getting investment into entrepreneurship. How have you sold the message of
Tahoe on why we need to invest monetarily in this community.
Okay, so I guess I kind of have an answer, at least for entrepreneurship, and this is very different than their worlds, which is, distributed teams are a more and more accepted, form of company these days that investors are actually willing to take part in. So you can point to big companies like Automatic, who, people are distributed. Their teams are all over the United States and even Europe. And so, the fact that a headquarters is in South Lake Tahoe isn't so far-fetched anymore. So, the fact that you're raising a company, if you're still assembling a world-class team, you're able to do that now through distributed teams. And I would say that's one big thing. But then two, the quality of life, the burn rate that a business would have here in South Lake Tahoe, given how cheap office space is in comparison with Austin, Texas, or San Francisco, or one of the other markets that are well developed. There's actually a thesis for, building tech in towns that aren't necessarily expensive. If you look at Ohio, there's a number of towns that are exploding right now for that very reason. There's no reason that South Lake can't too, as long as whatever is being done is environmentally friendly and not going to ruin the scenic corridor that we have here. So,
From a philanthropic perspective, there's two different stories, Jude, here. So there's a community that lives here year-round that does give. So we're able to quantify that. There's another community that does not, and that's a conversation that the foundation's had with the second homeowners, and it's an important conversation with them. These homes tend to be generational, many of them, where the family owns it and passes it down. Our conversation with them is, if you want this community to be the community that you love, the same community in 10 to 20 years from now, you need to start investing in it. Because if you don't, it's not going to be. They have to start playing a role here. And it goes beyond, I know you pay property taxes, I know that you also pay other fees, but you also have to invest in the social fabric of the community. Because you are a part of it. You do come here because you love this place. And so it's helping them to understand what it is they can do and how they can do it. And it might be through the venture capital. That might be the connection, because a lot of those homeowners live in that geographical area of Silicon Valley, the East Bay, San Francisco. And then there's a lot of homeowners that have second homes that live on the Western Slope. So they're even more local.
Yeah, and I think another thing is, if you have a nonprofit and for Boys and Girls Club, if you're going forward, you have to really be transparent. You have to show the value. And I think I do think that we have a community that does care about each other, which is already, we're kind of thumbs up on that, and showing the value of what is coming back to the community. Our new Tahoe Women's Community Fund has really done, I think, for a new community fund, has done exceptionally well in showing the value of what all of us coming together and putting a little bit in from each one of us, what collectively we get, and what collectively we're going to get with a new Boys and Girls Club, for instance, what collectively we get through Bread and Broth, what collectively we get by each of us being a part of that. And as a community member, it makes me feel like I'm the winner too, even though I might be the one that's giving the money. So.
And that is a real indicator in this community, the Tahoe Women's Fund. So you have something that is just in its third year, relatively new, to have the explosion of growth that they've had. The Women's Fund on the Western Slope, the Women's Fund El Dorado, has been in existence for 10 years. They're just reaching 490. It took them a while to get to the level this one has reached in 3 years. And the age difference is huge. You walk into this one, the average age is going to be 40, 50. And on the Western Slope, it's 60, 70. Big difference. And when you asked about how the funds come in, where our money comes from, we've only had, as far as I'm aware at the foundation, there's only been one gift that's come from outside the county. Everything comes from inside El Dorado County. We had one individual that wanted to create a donor-advised fund with the San Francisco Foundation. She called. It was going to be $1.5 million. They told her that she could do that online. Yeah. And she called us because her son lived in El Dorado County, and we provided the concierge service that she was looking for. So that's the outside one. So,
Get more though.
yeah.
So I'll segue into the age issue of, and address it to David. I guess part of it's comment and part of it's a question. For those of us who did move here 40-some years ago and thought we would be leaving after a couple of years, we were, a little bit younger then. And I guess my question, I'm not sure how to frame it, but you and your family moved here, what'd you say, 4 years ago?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Tahoe, you created, I think, community, the money's great. That always helps, but it's beyond the money piece of it that I think that you and your posse it is part of it's a generational thing that I think is really exciting to a lot of us, because I think it's moved our community beyond being very homogenous, that I think, that we were all here for skiing or whatever, where just your generation and you're bringing back people who did grow up here, that up until a few years ago, young people would go away and they never came back because they didn't have the place to be. So I guess my question is, how do you feel about that, and where do you feel that, you should have a lot of pride in, we do all know that you're Jamie's husband. But, you're creating a place of your own. So where does that all fit in? Because it's more than the money and that energy that you're bringing to the community.
Yeah.
Bill keeps talking about community. It's that
Well,
whole encompassing.
It's culture and density, right? And it's also not leaving behind the people that are already here. And that's one of the challenges of gentrification, right? And, runaway gentrification, everyone some people, especially if you're a homeowner, you want gentrification because it means your home price goes up, right? But there's a negative side effect to that, right? Where it makes the community unaffordable for some. And so one of the big points of pride for me, at least as far as my efforts, along with my superpowered wife, Jamie, have been able to, she's working on the educational side to create programs not only with Lake Tahoe Community College, but regionally for workforce stuff, so that people can actually step up their game in this community, and so that when we're bringing in, maybe we attract another company from New Zealand, let's take Eagle Protect, and we bring them into the community, and, there is someone who is a local, born and raised here, who actually fills the role for the person that they're looking for, or is able to, right? And is able to, instead of making an average of, I forget what it is, per family, $30,000 a year, they're finding themselves making 50, 60, or 70, right? And that's the huge point of pride, where I've watched that exact same thing happen, where we've got a venture capitalist in the building, right? And a young local kid who's incredibly intelligent, wound up without a job suddenly, and moved right into the position of being this guy's right hand. He's an analyst now for a venture capitalist in the Mountain Lab, which is an amazing opportunity. That's where my sense of pride comes, is seeing, us sort of tread that delicate balance in the community, of uplifting the people who are already here while bringing in other people and leveraging them to help.
Yeah.
This question is for you, David. So what are the tech companies that we need to be aware of that could possibly set up their headquarters here, and maybe because of the way that initially the community responds to those companies, i.e. Line Bike, would possibly be turned off? And how are ways that we can welcome those companies to invest more in Tahoe?
The public reaction to the Lime Bike last summer was actually a really terrifying moment for myself, seeing the negative reaction. And the pilot was really a weird moment in time where Silicon Valley was sort of meeting Tahoe for the first time and poking it in a very strange way. But it was happening. And the reaction was like poking a bee's nest. And it was disappointing. But then I found out the Lime Bike people were totally happy with their pilot. Of all their pilots that they did across the entire nation, it was the best pilot, right? And so apparently people are angry everywhere.
Yeah.
But to answer your question too, the reactions, we as a community need to be more positive about change. But what is really scary is that whole idea of change. When you're farther along in your years and you're tired and you maybe don't have enough for retirement and you're sitting there and these young people are coming in, they're speaking a language you don't understand, that's terrifying. Let's just be real, right? And so you can understand why people don't want that change, right? And it's about informing that, hey, we're here to help. We're here to help you survive in this economy too. We're not just trying to gobble it up all for ourselves. But in the type of companies that should be here, I think without question, it's outdoor brands. If you had to, it could be apparel, it could be equipment. We have a number of ski and snowboard making companies that actually exist here. We have a guy who makes paddle boards, really expensive paddle boards in his garage that are quite amazing. And I think, what better environment to test a mountain bike or test a paddleboard or, do something of that nature. We've also got huge distribution facilities and production facilities down in Carson and Reno, which are really just a stone throw away. Not to mention all the technology and the sort of boom that's going on with Reno. There does seem to be a synergy and opportunity that we could take advantage of, especially in the outdoor space.
There's a gentleman that I just had the opportunity to meet about 2 weeks ago who's setting up the entire IT structure because Tesla's expanding again. And I said, why can't we do that in South Lake Tahoe? Why can't, you're that close, why can't you do that? And he goes, I don't know why. Why don't we talk about it? So it's those connections and those conversations and keeping them moving forward. Any other questions before I wrap up?
Rebecca.
Okay, go ahead.
I just have one comment, and it's to leverage what David said. We have amazing
Okay.
resources here.
Okay.
I think one of the things we sometimes lack is awareness. So we have a community. We all live within a few miles of each other, but we don't really have a central geographic gathering point, other than we end up in the same post office or the same supermarket. So I think if there's a way for us, and I don't have the answer, I'm doing my little part, but if there's a way for us to help people find other people with the same passions and figure out what resources are available here and what events are going on and what opportunities exist, I think that's part of the problem. There are a lot of people here who are geographically not too far apart, but aren't connected.
Maybe I should let Ben maybe say something right now, because I've had so many conversations on the same topic, if you were listening.
I think, so while we can criticize what happens on the internet, especially Facebook, when we're talking about this kind of issues, there's a clear answer, right? And it's not a panacea. But the fact is, we'll never have that geographic, central point. We're a very provincial region. North Lake, Truckee, all of these different areas around the lake. And I agree, the biggest thing is we're not connected. And so we don't interact, we can interact with the kind of frequency that you see in San Francisco, whatever. And I don't want all those people here, so to a certain level I'm okay with that. I think we all are. But I think, I know myself and others are having conversations, and I'm moving into a phase of my career now where hopefully I can actually work on this. Is creating a platform. The Prosperity Center actually had an event, I forget when it was, like 6 months ago or something, for me. And that was a big theme and I don't know, some of us were probably there. I was only there for kind of the tail end of it, and I actually stood up and said, I will build the platform. But the only way I can do that is if we all work together on this. I'm a technologist. I can build the technological platform. I can build the tools that we can use and collectively own to do this kind of thing. And that's the answer that I hope to bring to the table. And it's probably one of many.
To piggyback on that, I've got a flip side of that, is we've watched that happen in a number of different communities where they've tried to create that central kind of database, a web presence, and the problem with it is somebody's got to keep it updated, and it starts to degenerate at a pretty rapid pace, and then everything falls into confusion. So we tried to do that on the Western Slope. The Chamber tried to do it. We've seen other communities try to do it. We've talked to them, and they've struggled. But somebody has to consistently be responsible for continually updating that information. And leaving it to the organizations, it just doesn't happen. So that's sort of a lesson learned. Doesn't mean it can't come to fruition. It just means there's going to be some obstacles. And again, I go back to that emergent behavior. I think if you help the community in the right way, the community will find that. They will create that themselves. And that's what our hope is, that they do find their collective voice, and that it's an authentic voice. That's the other really important part. So, yeah.
Rebecca, did you have a question?
I just have a question that I really like burning to ask Bill.
Oh, good.
It goes straight to your quote at the beginning and the end. The alpha and the omega. We have to be a little bit paranoid, right? Because this community, things kind of creep up on us. And I'm wondering, what are the changes that are happening to us, or will be happening to us, that maybe the three of you see as something that we should start making changes for ourselves in, rather than letting that change happen to us? Like, what's on the horizon?
That's a really good question.
I think one thing is, in the last 2 years, social media has totally changed. And the conversations on social media in just the last 2 years, if we think about this, has totally changed. It's gone from a place of pictures of cute children to nasty arguments, right? And this change, really, you can't trace it back. I mean, granted, there were always internet trolls, but it's gotten really bad in the last 2 years. And there's a reason why, and I won't get into a huge discussion about it, but one of the big changes you have to be aware is that social media as a platform has changed. And there's a lot of negativity on it. And I've struggled with this. Bill's called me out on some of my struggles on social media, embarrassingly sometimes. And you just got to not participate in the negativity.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down. You got to keep it positive, and you got to lead with positivity, right? And so that's one thing. You can't let this overarching negativity on our computers and our cell phones impact you in your daily life. You've got to be bigger than that. You've got to be better than that.
In your question, Ben, I had to take a step back for a moment because I wanted to get some clarity. So I'm glad David answered first, and it gave me that moment. From what I see is we are really rapidly moving towards that gentrification, and we're going to be losing a whole class of people that create the diversity in our communities, that add the vibrance and the vitality and the cause, the worth. And without that, I'm not sure what that's going to look like, and it sort of scares me because that homogeneous layer, it's almost like living, I'm afraid of living in Stepford, Connecticut. And so that's a fear I have because I see the value that culture brings, that diversity brings, and varying opinions. And I've seen what's happened to the Bay Area. The place where I grew up, where there was 24,000, now there's 2.5 million in that same place. And so that changes us. So do we all start to compete for space? And what does that look like? I don't compete for space in Shingle Springs. I drive through one light to get to work. And so I'm a lot more relaxed in how I relate to my community. But if I'm stressed out all the time, it's going to look a lot different. So that's one of the things I'm worried about. An increase in poverty and a separation between wealth. That's another one. It's being highly concentrated. And I know what our job is as a foundation. We're here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. That's what we do. But how much is too much? And education's another one. The post-secondary education is something else that's starting to trouble us. So we're looking at default rates significantly increasing to 4 out of 10 students that are coming out of college with a minimum of $30,000 in debt. Minimum. So what does that mean? So is it that only the wealthy can send their children to college? So that concerns us as well. So those are some of the things we see on the horizon. How do you prepare for it? Is working with organizations that are identifying the kids that are the first generation and send them to college. Get them ready and send them off to college. Work on programs to build sustainable communities that reflect all of us and build sustainable organizations to support them. You know, I don't think it's wise that the city of Folsom is going to be building 10,000 homes south of Highway 50. That scares me. You know, I already freak out. I moved from San Francisco, now live in Shingle Springs, and I hyperventilate when I go to Folsom. It's like, whoa, there's too many people here. So I become a little spoiled. So I'm going to wrap up here unless somebody has a burning question. I want to talk about where we're going with this. So we're going to have another speaker series, and then all the speakers will come back together in a facilitated form. And we're going to start a visioning process of how do we combine all the elements that we see, and then come back before you. I believe it's in November. I think it's the 15th. I had it up on the screen. I've already forgotten. And present that in a collective vision and a place to start the next chapter, which is the next degree that we go to. What is that next step of change that we create in the community? So thank you for being here. I can't wait to sleep in bed tonight. It's going to take me about an hour and 20 minutes to get home. And thank you so much. I so enjoy being here in South Lake Tahoe, being able to work with the people in this community. It is a vibrant, wonderful place, and some place that needs our attention. So thank you. Thanks.